Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into this video about seeing the same event from different perspectives. I developed these lessons after seeing, especially on the GED high school equivalency, how one of the types of questions that was most commonly missed was seeing the same event from different perspectives. And so created two different lesson plans that you can use with your students that use primary sources. One of which is on the Japanese internment, which started in 1942, where Japanese Americans, many of whom were U.S. citizens, were placed against their will in internment camps, concentration camps, in some very remote parts in the western part of the United States. And they were in those camps for the remainder of the war until 1945. The second lesson is a brighter spot, and that is the Berlin airlift, which occurred in 1948 and 1949 after the Soviet Union attempted to blockade Berlin in order to try to bring it into their sphere of influence. Fascinating story, really, both of these. I had the chance actually to talk to some witnesses firsthand about this event, the Japanese internment event specifically, and that was my dad and mom. Dad and mom were both still alive. Dad's 91, mom's 88. They were both members of the greatest generation that went through the Depression in the 1930s, went through World War II in the 1940s. My father was turned 18 in 1945, and he describes how in those later years where he'd be walking to school, and people would say on the street corners, "Hey, why aren't you in the service there, young man?" And, he wasn't 18 years old yet and couldn't serve. And he was drafted into the Army in August of 1945. And he always credits President Harry Truman with saving his life when he made that very difficult decision to drop the atomic bomb on Japan. Dad was in the extra numer areas, which were scheduled to be part of the invasion of the Japanese homeland. And they were predicting millions of casualties on both sides for an invasion of the Japanese homeland, which never happen. So I asked Dad about the Japanese internment and what he felt about it, and he was pretty strong even to this day that he felt the United States had done the right thing. And of course, who you are in this debate depends very much how you feel. If you were a Japanese American, a U.S. citizen who you're really in violation of the law, was sent to these virtual prisons for several years, and you had to pretty much give up all your goods, your home, your car, because people knew that they were leaving and they were forced to leave, and they had a very limited amount of time, the Japanese Americans, to go and report to these camps. So they had virtually no negotiating power. So I've read stories about selling all their furniture for a few dollars and homes being sold for a ridiculously low amount, cars, businesses. And some, out of anger and frustration, destroyed their items, destroyed their homes, destroyed their goods because they knew they would really get nothing for them. So just out of anger, just destroyed them. So we really have, looking at these events from the past, we always have the benefit of hindsight. We know how things turned out, and we know that the United States and the Allies ended up winning World War II, and that there was never an invasion of the United States homeland, which was a very strong fear in 1942, especially. When I asked Dad, he talked a lot about the three F's, fear, fury, and frustration being those three F's that a lot of people in the United States were feeling at that time. And the fear was, the Japanese had launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and there were 2,400 Americans that were killed during that attack, and there was certainly always that fear that the west coast of the United States was vulnerable to an attack, and so that fear was very, very strong. There was also fury. We can liken this back to 9/11. There was a lot of anger toward the terrorists that launched those attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and those other areas. We remember that very, very well. That same fury was really directed against the Japanese people during that time after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. So that was a very strong fear. There were worries that the Japanese Americans, other Japanese people on the West Coast would be victims of attacks. And certainly we see pictures of homes that were vandalized. I'm not aware that any killing took place, but there was certainly that fear. And there was just really a lot of frustration that were going on once the U.S. got into the war. All the consumer goods that people were used to buying were no longer available. Everything was shifted over fairly quickly to the war effort. You could not buy a new car. There was very limited grocery items that you could get, and you had to have ration stamps to get those. It's really something that we have a hard time dealing with today because we go into a supermarket and just see there's just so many choices. It's sometimes hard to make a choice because there's so many choices. So, but at that time, that was certainly not the case. So, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this lesson where we see the same event and it depends who you are and how you see those? I was doing some research when I first developed these lessons and came across an idea that a young lady had done in Baltimore, a young teacher, an elementary school teacher, and she used sports as a way to do this. She showed a clip from a Baltimore Ravens football game. And it would really depend if you were a fan of the Ravens or whatever team that they were playing as to how you viewed a certain call. And so I used that in these lessons. And in the Japanese internment lesson, you're actually looking at a video clip of a sports event, and you could have the students divide up on either side, the red team and the white team. And how you view that team is going to depend on how you see that call. So I thought that was a great metaphor about how to really see the same event from these two different perspectives. So in these lessons, you've got a detailed lesson plan that shows what to do step by step. You have some primary sources, both inside with the Japanese internment and the Berlin airlift. And you have a graphic organizer in the Berlin airlift, so you can kind of see how the different sides would feel based on what was going on. So this is a tricky thing to do, to have somebody see the same event from two sides, but I think sports provides a really good way to get inside this, because we can really make that leap, because depending if we're a fan of that team and the referee makes a certain call, we're going to feel either happy or sad based on that. So I think that's a really good entry point inside of this. So I hope you'll find some use for these lessons, or at least for the idea, however you take it from there. And let me know how things go as you do these lessons, about how that works in your class, or if you have some other ideas, I'd be anxious to hear it. So hope you enjoy these lessons, and let me know how it goes.